Welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome Colonel Miguel Cruz today. He's the commander of Space Delta 4 at Buckley Space Force Base. His career started as a distinguished graduate from the University of Puerto Rico, and he's also a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Weapons School, the Air Force Fellows Program, the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies, and the Inter-American Defense College. And he was inducted into the United States Space Force in October 2020. So I think I am personally really grateful to him for taking time out of his schedule and out of his important mission to talk to us today. The topic of his talk will be, why does the United States need a Space Force? And I think, as his presentation will show, the work he does is very relevant to events that are going on in the news right now. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Colonel Cruz.
All right, so thank you so much, Dr. Galkowski. Really appreciate it, and to the students and faculty, thanks very much for allowing me to take some of your time as you're going through about your studies and your work and so on. Yes, the mission is important, but it's also important for us to communicate with the American people, with the community, the importance of what we do, why we were created, and so on. You hear a lot of things in the news and the media and things like that. Some are jokes, some are not, some are more serious. But the cross of things is, I think if we all, at some point in the near history, we understand that the creation of the Space Force was not a political statement, but was in fact a necessity out of things that I'm about to talk to you about a little bit. Of course, I'll entertain the questions that you have, whether they are via raising your hand or posting on the chat, or later, if you think about a question, if you don't feel like doing it in public right now, you can certainly reach out to me and we can have a conversation and go from there. So again, thanks very much for the opportunity. Again, Colonel Miguel Cruz, I go by Mac. I've been in the service for 25 and a half, almost 26 years, out of which 24 were doing space operations in the Air Force. So 24 years in the Air Force, and then 2 years and change, or a year and a half or so in the Space Force. But throughout my career, everything that I have done has been in space operations. I actually started my career in the nuclear business, nuclear weapons business, ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, things of that nature. And then I transitioned to space operations after my very first tour. And then I've done a series of operations throughout. Why don't we go to the next slide? All right, so I think one thing that is probably important to cover is the reason why the Space Force was created. Again, it was not a political statement by a particular individual or group of people or administration or whatever. In fact, the discussion about the Space Force have been for quite a few years. We just had not realized the importance of making it until more recently. It was very much a decision made on a reality that a lot of what we do in a day-to-day life, and I'm not even talking defense, just our day-to-day life depends or hinges upon what space can provide. You know, if anybody here lifts up your cell phone, right? Just take your cell phone and point to your favorite application, whichever it is, right? Whether it's Discord for your gaming, or is your social media, or is your navigation application, or your transportation, your cell phone messaging, whatever the case may be. If you tap on that application, you have automatically connected to space. You may not see it. You may not, it may not be readily apparent, but it is connected to space. Everything that we do, from banking, economics, agriculture, navigation, social life, the way that we order food, the way that we track our pets, the way that we wake up in the morning and look at our stats, or look at the market, in the news and so on. Everything hinges upon the access that we have to space. For those of you who may be old enough to remember, Desert Storm was a conflict where we started to realize the importance that space had for us. From, in my particular mission area, how we track those Scud missiles that were launched from Iraq, and so on. So, but that wasn't a quote unquote space war, if you will. It was just a war that was very much enabled by that position and navigation, right? That GPS, whenever we say GPS, is not a widget in your phone. A GPS is a global positioning system. Is a constellation of satellites in space that provides that free for the world. It is managed by units here in the Space Force. So that opened our eyes to the possibility of what space was going to be. But guess what? It also opened the eyes to our adversaries of what space meant for us in the US. And of course, as countries will do, they always try to go to the places where you think you find more vulnerabilities. And that, for the US, for the longest time, for several decades now, it has been the realm of space. We have decided and we determined that it was necessary to create a service that was purely devoted to manage and to defend our interests in space. Consider that from an economic standpoint, space brings about maybe, maybe a couple $1 trillion of business in one way, shape, or form, whether it is directly or indirectly related throughout the world. And that is expected to double, triple, quadruple over the next 5 to 10 years. So why wouldn't you want to protect something that is so important to you? You may think, well, but the Air Force was doing it for the longest time. Yes, but the Air Force was purpose-built to defend the air realm, just like the Navy was purpose-built to defend the sea lines of communication, and so on and so forth. We have just decided, okay, it is time in the history of our nation to create a service that is devoted to protect that which is so important to us in space. From my particular mission area, missile warning, I'll talk a little bit about that, and Dr. Galkowski is absolutely right. Some events going on the world have brought up the importance of that. So to give you a quick synopsis of how we organize the space, and the Space Force is the smallest service, not only the youngest service, is also the smallest service. We did it that way for a reason. We didn't want to create an overburdening service. A lot of the functions and capabilities were already residing in the Air Force, and they were extracted from the Air Force and made to create a new service. But we also wanted an organization that was somewhat flat, and more focused on the lethality and less focused on the burdensome administrative bureaucratic aspects that sometimes revolve some of the services. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like. Next slide.
Sorry.
That's right.
Okay.
All right. So Space Force really has what we call 3 and only 3 field commands. One field command, a Space Systems Command, is devoted to acquisitions of new capabilities and development and sustainment of those capabilities. Space Operations Command is in charge of all the operations. This is where Delta 4 falls, and there's actually about 8 other deltas, and I'll tell you what a delta is in just a second, that are devoted to specific mission areas, but that's for the purpose of operations. And then there's a third one that has to do with training, readiness, doctrine development, exercise and evaluation, testing, and things of that sort. That is it. Only 3 field commands. Each field command has a number of deltas. For those of you who are familiar with other services, a delta is equivalent to a Marine regiment or an Army brigade, for example, or an Air Force wing, is the colonel officer level of responsibility from where a particular mission area or capability is brought to bear. In my case, is missile warning. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we have a Delta 2 that is specializes in space domain awareness, so tracking objects in space, having awareness of where everything is in space, whether it was a functional satellite or maybe it's just a rocket booster that is still going around the Earth because it hasn't come down and burned into the atmosphere. Space Delta 3 for space electronic warfare, Space Delta 4 for missile warning and missile tracking. Delta 5 is our command and control element that essentially orchestrate operations throughout the enterprise of Space Operations Command. Delta 6 is cyber operations. Cyber defense operations particularly have become very, very important to us. A lot of what we do is obviously connected in some way, shape, or form into cyber. And of course, there's a lot of cyber capabilities out there that could harm or interrupt our operations. We don't want that to happen. So we have a particular Delta that is focused on that. Delta 7 is our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. We understand that we need space-specific intelligence for our operations. In fact, I have some folks that are in loan to me and Delta 4 from Delta 7 providing missile warning and tracking specific intelligence, which is very important for us. Delta 8 is all the satellite communication, your navigation and timing, where GPS falls under. And then Delta 9 for orbital warfare, that is a developing delta right now. And like I said, every field command has a structure with different deltas. All those deltas are commanded and directed by an 06, a colonel level individual in charge of those things. If we take an even closer look to what Delta 4 looks like within that construct in the next slide, I have three subsets of my delta. The first one is what we call the S-staff or the support staff that carries all the administrative oversight management functions on my behalf. So we have things, for example, like personnel and manpower, budgeting and resourcing, intelligence, operations, plans, evaluations, inspections, all those kinds of things that help me run the administrative and management functions of being an organization, a government organization. But then I have the squadrons that are directly reporting to the Delta. This is going to make a little bit more sense in a little bit when we talk about how they are distributed. 9 direct report units, 5 of those are ground-based radars located in 5 or 6 different time zones around the world, predominantly looking at strategic missile threats. So think about the big, long-reaching missiles like ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, or SLBMs, sea-launched ballistic missiles, all those very long-range type of missiles. We also have a couple of units that deal with what we call the overhead or the orbital side of our mission. Satellites looking from space onto Earth, detecting IR signatures, infrared signatures, when there's a missile launch around the Earth. That fulfills a function not only in the strategic sense that I just described, but also on the tactical or theater-specific threats. For example, medium-range, short-range missiles that may go from, say, Syria to somewhere in Saudi Arabia, for example, just to give you an example. So those are things that we can track as well. So we have the big, larger strategic context. We also have the smaller, in some ways, theater context as well. And then Detachment 2, which is our training detachment, focus on training all the new operators coming to fulfill all those missions that I just described. And then on the bottom, we have the supporting elements of the supporting units. These are not units assigned to me administratively, but they provide support. In the military, we call it, they're chopped to me. They have been assigned to me for the purpose of supporting my operations. And that is either on the cyber defense side of the house, like the 62nd CYS. You see that they belong to Delta 7. Detachment 4 for the intelligence piece, that is specific missile warning, missile tracking intelligence vis-a-vis any other mission area. That's the one that they focused. You see they belong to another Delta, Delta 7. And then we have representation from the National Guard, the reserve component, as well as international partners at RAF filing bills in England as well. In all, I know the slide says about 1,100 people. It's actually more closer to about 1,250 by now. Individuals assigned to my command in managing or operating or supporting 7 distinct systems at 11 locations worldwide. So we are a very distributed organization, very broad, very large organization, which brings some nuance to the way that we have to lead. And I'll talk a little bit about innovation at the end of the presentation. Innovation in terms of trying to bring this Delta that is so distributed together, is very important and near and dear to me. Next slide. Now we are, as far as the mission itself, as I mentioned, strategic and theater missile warning. And we do that essentially for 3 main audiences, if you will. The first one is to support, obviously, the United States in our strategic mission to defend against a strategic attack, but also to provide the same support to our international partners based on treaty and agreements. And lastly, on the theater side of the house, to provide and support the combatant commanders at the respective combatant commands, whether it is the European theater or the Pacific theater or the Southcom theater or the North American theater, and protect those individuals deployed around the world from any missile attack that may affect them. First and foremost, our concept or what we do is about deterrence. There's a lot to be said about what an adversary doesn't do to us because folks are standing watch, right? our deterrence is not so much about what you can do to an adversary, right? You kill the person or destroy a building, you do those. That's not so much about that. It's more about what they don't get to do because they know that you will always catch them. And you will always see what they're doing. And so there's a lot of deterrence in what we do, but also to protect human lives, as I just mentioned, if necessary, based on the indications and warnings that we can provide, we can enable a US or international decisive response to any actor that may be attempting to attack our forces or allied forces and so on. Because of what we do and the capabilities that are brought to bear, particularly on the orbital side of the house, there's a myriad of other subset of missions that we can support, whether it's civil applications of fires and missile defense. For example, our sensors not only pick up a missile, they also report and maintain custody of a missile so that in missile defense component or element can shoot it down, right? So I like to say it this way. I like to compare what we do is a much larger spotter to a much larger sniper. So that's essentially how we conduct our operations. A lot of it technical intelligence by observations and so on. In our ground-based radars, yes, their main purpose is to track missiles, but because they're radars that can operate based on Doppler effect and phased array technology, they can also maintain a good catalog of objects orbiting in space. And based on where they are in the world, they know where those things are. So that's very important for us to know where our stuff is, but also to know where our adversary stuff is as well. Right. So that's important to us. And oh, by the way, if anybody has questions throughout the presentation, don't feel like you need to wait until the end. Just raise your hand, and Dr. Galkowski, I'm sure will monitor that and will let me know. Next slide. All right, so ground-based radars. This is a quick depiction of where they are located around the world. This is technology from Cold War technology. They were very much developed as analog systems. We have digitized them over the years to increase their capability, increase their redundancies on systems, increase their ability to pick up more objects, but also smaller objects. You have newer technology like the LRDR, the Long Range Detection Radar, discrimination radar, rather, in Alaska. That is completely digital. Right now, it's a different technology that has just been developed and is going to be managed by the Missile Defense Agency. And then the other radars, as you can see, is very much a phased array type of technology throughout the world. That is the ground up, if you will, looking kind of sensors. And then on the next slide, we have the space down type of sensors. We have a series of orbital regimes and several satellites. In those orbital regimes, those are not the exact numbers. I cannot give those exact numbers in specific locations, but let it be known that we can see the entire world 24/7. In fact, our motto is Vidibus Mundum, right? We see the world. And so that's how we monitor and track all the IR emanations that are coming from the ground. Very important to us, if you see on the bottom center, if you will, those antennas are part of a full array, global array of antennas around the world that transfer the data from one point to another, whether it is an orbital sensor to the antenna, and then it goes to our mission operations center, and so on. So there's a whole host of those. If you have driven here in Aurora and you've seen those big golf balls, it's not aliens, it's not missiles. That's what they have. They have big antennas. You know, there's about 50 tons each of them. Huge technology, again, from the Cold War, but we have been able to maintain those and continue to operate those. We have an upcoming mission, the Joint Tactical Ground Station. That is a mission that has been carried over the last 4 decades by the Army and is now being transferred into the Space Force. Delta IV will inherit that mission. Those are essentially forward deployed mini antennas that can also download data from our satellites, more specifically for the theater level kind of warning. So troops deployed anywhere in the world might get indications of warning that something is coming to them, and then they are able to duck and cover, for a lack of a better term. So those are upcoming missions that are coming to us. Next slide. Anyway, okay. All right, in terms of Space Force, now I'm going to transition. That was Delta 4. What we do, more or less how we are organized and the type of missions that we have. Space Force as a general has put a lot of emphasis in personnel development and holistic health as we come as a service. We have a grand opportunity to create a service in a way that we want, that doesn't necessarily replicate everything and anything that has come from other services. And so personnel development is a big one for us. This Space Force has a great appreciation for diversity and puts a lot of emphasis on that. A lot of emphasis on the team-centric versus the individual-centric models, to the point that some of our awards and recognition programs are more tailored to how does a team perform as opposed to how the individual performs. There's always, the assessment of performance of individuals, because that's how you progress and that's how you promote. But the emphasis really is how you can lead teams as opposed to how can you lead yourself. So that's big for us. And then as far as, because we're such a small service, I think by the end of when everything's said and done, we'll be about 1,500. Oh, I'm sorry, 15,000 folks. We're around 9,000 right now, which pales in comparison to about 330,000 in the Air Force, and maybe 600, almost 700,000 in the Army. So it's a very, very small team. We have an opportunity to have almost an individualized development plan for each Guardian as we're coming up in our ranks. And so that's very exciting to see, having spent 24 years in a much larger service, to be able to be in a service that is going to take a little bit more personalized approach to an individual's development is very, very exciting. Holistic health is really, in the services is all about, hey, how many push-ups, sit-ups, 1.5 mile run you can do, and so on. And that's all well and good. That's kind of like a snapshot in 1 year in time that doesn't necessarily inculcate wellness and fitness and mental, spiritual, physical wellness throughout the year as part of your person, as part of your development. And so what the Space Force is trying to do is to bring a little bit of a more holistic approach of how we assess people's wellness and fitness. Fitness is always going to be important for us as individuals that can deploy around the world, that will, that maybe call upon to deploy and do things like that. So health is always important, but we have also understood that the wellness of the individual has a direct connection to how they perform, right? How the family environment is going on has a direct impact of how an individual performs, especially if an individual is deployed in a remote location, right? So taking care of those things is very important for us as well. Next slide. And that also takes into account how we develop and how we progress people. On the left-hand side, you see the rank structure. On the officer side, it hasn't really changed much. Most services, with the exception of Navy, uses pretty much the same insignias, if you will. The enlisted side did change. We did want to give a specific personality and identity to our ranks and our structure. So our uniform is also changing. Some of you might have seen some of that. On the right-hand side, you have the old stereotypical pyramid, right? You need to do these things at this times of your career in order to progress to be a commander or a general officer or whatever. The Space Force is moving a little bit away from that, understanding that we need to be able to define success for people in multiple ways, not just one route to success, right? Not everybody wants to be a general. Not everybody wants to be a commander, for example. It takes a bit, a special desire to be able to do those kinds of things and the challenges that those bring. If an individual enters the service and wants to purely become a technical expert, you ought to be able to do that. And quite frankly, we need people that are very, very, very good at what they do. You just need to come with the expectation that maybe you will not be a general, but that's okay. Maybe that's not what you want to do. And then you develop people to do management or planning, and then you develop people to do more leadership type management roles. But you do that, obviously everybody's going to have some foundation, some baseline of understanding. You need to be an operator. You need to be able to understand that aspect. But as you grow into the service, you will be able to come in and out of that and come into a particular area as you see fit, as the service needs as well as how the supervisors push you to as well. And that also includes how we bring the National Guard and the reserve component too. There's a lot of discussion in Congress right now about what we call the one component. The one component concept is there's no such thing as active duty reserves in National Guard. We're all the same. At some point, we may get to that. There's a lot of policy and a lot of politics that gets involved with that. But also, if you are in a moment in your life when you cannot be active duty and you need to develop or steer yourself towards, say, a reserve component so that you can have a little bit more time with family and maybe progress in industry, and then you can come back in a few years and go back to the active duty. Right now, it's very difficult to do things like that. We want to be able to change that paradigm and allow people to come in and out depending on how their life circumstances change and dictate. So that will be a big emphasis for us. Let's see, what do we have on the next slide? Economic and scientific development is always going to be, important for us. The Air Force was, and the space side of the house in the Air Force was always the most technologically oriented side of the service. So naturally, the Space Force is probably going to be the most technologically steered or inclined service by virtue of what we do. A lot of our systems are state-of-the-art systems, and a lot of technology that goes into space programs and space capabilities, right? So that's very important. How we do acquisitions, however, to get that done is something that we absolutely need to change. It was in the old days, actually, not even the old days, just as of 3 years or 4 years ago, the average lifetime or time frame to develop a system from development, from idea to put it on an orbit, it was about 11 to 12 years. That was great for a benign, easy-paced environment. It is not for today's environment. Right now, we're launching at a rate that is incredibly high vis-a-vis what we used to do in the past. In fact, even in the DoD side of the house, you would have never thought about launching 2 rockets or 3 rockets from the same location in one day. We are done doing that day in and day out right now. They're just turning launch pads like this. You've seen SpaceX and where we are with that. You've seen the increase of orbital capabilities put on space at the same time, right? That the fact that SpaceX or Starlink can put 100 mini satellites on orbit in one shot. So what, right? Putting one into space, it was a big deal 50 years ago. Right now, we're putting 200 at the same time with some of the capabilities that are coming out. And it's not only DoD, it's the commercial sector as well, other nations as well. So how we develop systems is going to need to change in a much rapid sense. What that means is that we're probably going to have a few state-of-the-art exquisite sensors, but we're going to steer a little bit more on less expensive, more proliferated type of architectures, things that if they are broken can be taken, their place can be taken up by another standing by sensor, or you can just replenish that by virtue of launching more frequently. We couldn't do that with some of the sensors that we actually operate here in Delta IV. Those are exquisite multi-billion-dollar sensors that we're probably going to have to change as we progress in the next generation of missile warning capabilities. Let's see, DoD budget is about $773 billion. I think that's what the last 2023, fiscal year 2023 budget was. The Space Force One is about 20, I want to say it's about 24. Oh yeah, it's right there in the slide, $24.5 billion. So it's, it kind of gives you an idea of where that falls. And a lot of that, I'll be honest, comes to capabilities that come to Delta IV. Because of the nature of the mission and what we need to be able to observe, or we need to be able to communicate in a very fast real time. There's a lot of money that goes through that. Something the Space Force has been doing as well is open up its partnership with industry as well as academia. The Air Force just announced the winners of the University Consortium Research. You see them right there. You have Central Florida, Michigan, you have New Mexico, Akron, and you see the different types of topics that they are being steered towards as well. I know Professor Jordi Puig, from Cal Poly, and Bob Twiggs from Stanford has also been doing a lot of CubeSat type of and small sat type of research as well. to work with the Space Force. And those are things that are very, very, we're very interested in smaller technologies to get after solar irradiance, test-bed commercial for off-the-shelf differential global positioning, enable small satellite to conduct proximity operations. Now imagine, for example, right now you put an object in space, and once it goes into space, that's where it is. There's no maintenance guy that goes up there to change the light switches, right? It doesn't work like that. But imagine if you have some kind of small satellite that can perform some minor type of repairs on an object that is already on orbit. That will be awesome, right? We're talking about things like how do you transport things from one part of the globe to another one on a rocket, right? Talking about, next day delivery is not next day delivery, it's next hour delivery type of thing. It might have sounded like crazy 10 years ago, but it's all possible right now, right? And it's very exciting to see that. And then if we go to the next slide, this is something that is near.
One question on this one, because it says on this slide 15,000 Guardians by the end of the year. I thought on the other one you had that it was, you have like a 1,200 or 1,250 right now. Is that?
Oh yes, yeah. So under my command, I have about 1,250 Guardians under my command.
I see. Okay.
Right now. The Space Force as an organization, all those deltas, all those field command as a service in its totality, we should be around 15,000. And I'm sorry if I confused the hundreds with the thousands. We should have about 15,000 by the end of the year. And that's going to be our cap, right? Give or take, for standing missions. Now, we understand there are some new missions coming. And that was something that Congress, we were very specific with Congress. We told them, hey, we're not going to grow crazily. New missions may require additional resources, and that's understood, but that is as we develop over time. Right now, the goal is to keep on ongoing missions 15,000 people, and that is it. And so that puts just to give you a context, I told you field command to Delta to squadron, there's only 3 levels. In the Air Force, there's at least 5 levels, right? And so that adds levels of bureaucracy and levels of administrative hoopla that we don't have to go through, right? My boss is a 3-star general, and his boss is the chief of space operation, the gentleman that you see on the top left right there, Chief General Raymond, and that's it. It goes that fast, right? So the decision in making is much more prudent, I would say, is much faster for us, which is a good thing. But it also forces us to think outside of the box and to come up with processes, tactics, organizational designs that are not necessarily conforming to the traditional military standard way of doing business. But we just need to do it that way because we're so small, right? And we need to focus on the things that really matter. For example, operations, inspections and things like that are important, but administrative compliance is always in our field, in our business. Administrative compliance is subservient to combat capability. Our role is defending the nation. So that's where our focus is. And that's something that has been pushed, right front and center for us as we grow our organizations. The Delta 4, by the way, we just turned 2 years. So it's a very young service, very young organizations. Of course, most of us come from another service. So we bring some of that good stuff, but also sometimes some of the bad things. And we need to kind of shake that up a little bit. Does that answer the question, Dr. Lee?
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And then the last one is just something that is near and dear to my heart because I wanted to bring it up front and center to us. You might have heard that there have been a couple of tests around the world. And last October, I think it was, when China tested a hypersonic glide vehicle. So let me paint this picture to you. The way that we do our business right now is by tracking missiles that have already a predetermined path, right? So a missile, an ICBM, standard ICBM, launches from, I don't know, Kazakhstan, and I don't know, SS whatever number. It already has a predetermined profile of how the sensors look at it. It flies only in that way. It generates that much heat, and it doesn't vary or change paths. It's the way that it goes. That's how we detect. That's how we can project when that object is going to hit and where it's going to hit because it already has a predetermined path. But what happens when you have a sensor or a system that launches, but is maneuverable. So you don't know where it's going. Oh, by the way, it's going at very, very, very fast speeds. I'm talking about over 10 Mach speed, right? Around the world to hit a target, whatever it wants, and it can change at any given time. So that complicates the what we call our kill chain, the ability to detect, maintain custody of that, and then kill it before it kills us. So the chart on the bottom left is a bit of a representation of what I just saw. You saw the missile is that dotted line. Yeah, it's very standard in its trajectory. And then on the bottom on the red line, you see a hypersonic. Now, by the way, it doesn't generate a lot of heat unless, especially when it goes orbital. So it's very difficult to track, right? Because our sensors are, as I just mentioned, based on IR detection. If you don't generate the heat, you can't detect the missile. And then it pops up somewhere else in the world when it's too late for you to be able to do that. Right now, between the combination of our orbital and ground-based sensors, we can track and maintain custody through initial stages, mid-course intercept, provide mid-course intercept data, and then some Missile Defense Agency element like a GBI or a THAAD missile can go ahead and engage that missile and destroy it. That is much more difficult to do when you have a highly maneuverable vehicle. This is what keeps me up at night right now, is the ability to do that. Right now, we have some ways to get after that by collaging, including together data from sensors that are not necessarily Delta IV sensors. So a lot of interoperability and interconnection between that. But it's getting very, very frustrating. It's not an impossible challenge, but it's a very difficult challenge to get after. And you know, there's going to be a lot of those. That seems to be the way that China and Russia are moving forward. The traditional threats still remain, but this seems to be the new way of a ballistic missile. In this case, it's not even ballistic; it's just hypersonic type of missile. And how to get and maintain custody of this is going to be one of the things that really affects us moving forward in the future. Last thing that I will mention, it was in Dr. Galkowski, you alluded to in the beginning, this whole Russia-Ukraine event going on. Of course, the United States is not at war. Right? I'll be upfront with that. We're not at war. However, we do have a responsibility as a NATO member to provide information to our NATO allies. We also have responsibility to our combatant commanders to protect deployed troops around the world. And so, yes, a lot of the stuff that is happening in Ukraine is being detected and reported from our op floors right here, and it's been pretty what is the right word to use, eye-opening to see the significant increase in missile activity that we have had over the last few months. Has been something that we have never seen before, and something that has actually surprised us a little bit. Not so new and other deployed in place missions like, I don't know, Global Hawk or Predator operations where you're remotely looking at an operation in theater and maybe somebody gets killed or something gets blown up, and that affects individuals when they are when they're in the operations floor. But that's something we have never witnessed until Russia-Ukraine. And in Russia-Ukraine, some of our operators, you're here at Buckley Space Force Base. Your wife and kids are in the housing complex just a few miles down the road. You have just completed a 8 to 12 hour shift. You have seen the things that you have seen, and then you go home and you're watching CNN, the repercussions of what you just reported on. And that's just playing in people's head, to the point that some, ask for the chaplain or ask to see mental health professionals and so on. We've been very lucky. We have mental health professionals embedded with the crews right here. The chaplain goes and visits and so on. But these are things that we were not used to because space was not supposed to be this angry, right? And our operators are starting to see it. So to us, it was very much a first snippet of what we're fighting feels like as we move into that in the future. So anyway, just want to leave that to you. I think we have more than a few minutes here for questions, and I think that's my last slide. We'll go to the next one.
All right, this one. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So now just open out a question for anything you guys have. If I know the answer, I'll give it to you, and if not, then I'll take it as a homework, and then I'll figure out the answer, and then I'll send it to you via Dr. G. So fire away, don't be shy.
Okay, any questions from anyone? If not, maybe I'll ask one while everyone's warming up. So, what kind of talking about one of the things you said, this reality of conflict and adversaries, right? You said you know a lot about the adversaries. I imagine the adversaries know a lot about try to know a lot about us too. Does that mean that Buckley or here, Colorado Front Range, we're also a target on somebody's system, or
well, if I was to tell you that's not new. That's not new. We have been doing this business for a very, very, very long time. Cheyenne Mountain, look at it. It's where we conduct a lot of the command and control, or not command and control, but fusing of data that has to do with strategic attacks against the United States. It's not new. I think it just brings it more to reality because now you get to see a lot of these things in CNN that you didn't get to see in the past, or your favorite news outlet, right? So it becomes a little bit more front and center. It's not something that is new. We've been depending on space, whether it is for this mission area or any other mission area, for a very, very, very long time. It's just that it hasn't brought up to the front because nobody has actually contested it or hold it at risk. Now it is. So imagine yourself, if I was to ask any of your students, Dr. Galkowski, who of your students would love to volunteer for a year without a cell phone? I don't know how many volunteers we'll have, but probably not many. Why? Why would you? Because it's part of our life. It's who we are. It has become part and parcel of who we are as a nation. Space has become so ingrained in everything that we do that we sometimes take it for granted. And it hasn't been until now, when it actually is being contested, that we realize, oh, it is actually important. We do need somebody or somebody's a service that is devoted to protecting that. So I kind of went around to tell you, yeah, you kind of are.
Yeah, no,
but it's not new.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'll ask one more, since I don't see anyone jumping up and down to ask, but given all that you said, what's your prediction for the Space Force in 5-10 years? I think you said it's kind of capped, right? But it seems to, at least my impression is that the mission's going to just become ever more important, maybe even more important than some of the more traditional missions of the Department of Defense. But
yeah, I don't think we will grow too much more in terms of numbers of people. I think we'll always take pride in being a smaller, lethal, very flat type of organization. I see some changes in newer technologies. For instance, our own mission area, there is a new movement afoot to create the next generation of missile warning, missile tracking architecture. We're talking about 15 years down the road. So some of the legacy systems and legacy missions will gracefully transition into the new ones, but it will be the same amount type of operators. Maybe what we realize is a little bit more automation that comes with that. So instead of needing, 20 operators on an operations floor, maybe we need 10 or 15, because some of the functions have been automated, whether it is the telemetry tracking and command aspects of it, or maybe is the ground communications aspect of it, or maybe even in the detection and reporting aspect of things. Right now we have, by policy, by law, we actually have officers and operators visually confirming typology of a mission, of a missile, and providing data via voice, because we're not so reliant on technology right now. But my sense is that in the future, a lot of those things are going to be automated, and you might just need one person to go like, yep, press a button and release. So those things will probably change. There's a lot of room to grow in what I just alluded to, how we develop people, the talent management for the service, how we get about doing that. I think will be very novel. and very interesting. I'm very excited about what that will, coming from an old system. I'm very excited to see where that is going to head. Let's see. And then, investments in new technologies, how to protect, the orbital warfare mission set is what it sounds like. It doesn't take a 40-pound brain to understand it. It's orbital warfare. Nobody wants that to happen, but we have already seen, adversaries putting, weapons in space and, having satellites with robotic arms that can grab your satellite and pull it out of its orbit, or having satellites that can shoot something to kill something else, So we would be only kidding ourselves if we don't take seriously the threat that is out there, and us having to, to come up with mechanisms to protect ourselves against that. So there'll be some investments in technology for that sense. But as far as the size of the organization, no, I don't think so. I used to think that maybe in the future, in 10, 15 years, we'll become our own department. Right now, the Space Force is very much similar to what the Marines are with the Navy, right? You have the Department of the Navy, and then you have the Navy and the Marine Corps. So the Space Force is the same way. You have the Department of the Air Force, and then you have the Air Force and the Space Force, right? So it's a very similar arrangement. I don't think necessarily that we will get to be a department of the Space Force in the future. There's a lot to be said about the goodness that comes with being a smaller, much more focused in operations organization, I think.
Great, thank you for that. Any questions from anyone else? Really, no questions?
Either the briefing was awesome or it was really poor. Either I confused everybody or everything was perfectly clear. I don't think it was the latter, but
I'll bite. With a growing amount of stuff in space, does the Space Force have any plan to have a role in cleaning up like space junk or anything like that?
No, that's a great question. And I would say yes and no. So in a sense, is a lot of the things that are put into space right now, in the planning and development is put in, at least from the U.S. side of the house. We don't see this from some other countries, but we are relatively leaning forward when it comes to this, to put stuff in trajectories and in orbits that can decay naturally and then burn as they come into the atmosphere. That's easier in the LEO and the low Earth orbit regime, not so easy when you are in the middle or deep space kind of architecture. Remember, I was telling you about the small satellites. Maybe one day we'll have a small satellite that can go and attach to a sensor, fix something, and then go kind of like a mechanic satellite, if you will. I would foresee something similar to that for some from some orbital regimes, where you can kind of either collect or put in some. Right now, for deep space sensors, what we do is we super sync, which is really just push it out of the way so that you can put another sensor right there. But those other ones are, 15, 22, 30,000 miles above the atmosphere, right? So that thing's not coming back. That thing is going to stay there for quite a while. So there's a little bit of that. And what was the other thing I was going to say? And then just how do we develop sensors to actually decay themselves whenever they're no longer needed? There's a little bit to it, and there's frankly, the very lack of there's not a lot of rules of engagement or rules of behavior in space right now. For example, recently the United States exempted itself from doing orbital destructive tests. There's a reason for that, right? So there have been, I want to say, 4 anti-satellite weapon tests in history. The US and India, each one of them did 1. Out of those destructive tests, only 1 piece of debris remains in space, and that was an Indian from the Indian tests. The other one was Russia, and the other one in China. There's still thousands of pieces of debris of those particular test launches. When we did ours, Operation Burn Frost was called. The way that we did it was that we put the missile in a trajectory that will come down on the target satellite and push everything down. And so that was a very fancy way of doing that, obviously to prove to the world that we could do it, but also because it was the responsible thing to do. There's no rules of behavior on what to do or how to do that. So that's another area we could probably use some work in the future as we move forward. Let's see. Yeah, that's about that. But it is. Oh, one thing that I wanted to say. Most of that responsibility, however, will fall under the Department of Commerce. Believe it or not, the equivalency to that will be kind of like an FAA type of organization that monitors the traffic in space and then clears that up. It's actually a Department of Commerce mission just recently given, actually, not a year ago. But obviously in partnership with the Space Force and the Department of Defense. And then, of course, our space domain awareness mission, the one that I mentioned at the beginning, Delta II operates, which is understanding and being able to track everything that is in space, smaller size objects like a little pebble, nut, or bolt, to larger pieces of debris like a rocket booster, for example, and things. So knowing where everything is important for that aspect as well. Not only for that, but also for the purpose of putting other stuff in space. Right, the last thing you want is a satellite that is going to bump into a piece of debris because you couldn't account for it. Right, there's things up there that are interesting. There's an astronaut glove going around the Earth. Yes, there is. There's a wrench as well. I think last time I was tracking this kind of information, they were still up there. A lot of that, burns into the atmosphere. I think it's just coming up with ways to figure out the orbits so that when you put something in space, it comes back. And then you have things like, SpaceX and the reusable boosters. Right now, things don't stay there; they just push there and they come back, and you can reuse them. Who would have thought you could do that? 20 years ago. But now it happens almost every day. So that's a great question. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Then let me maybe ask one more. You mentioned the collaboration with the universities. So that's maybe something we as a university might be interested in. Is that just through the regular Air Force broad agency announcements for research, or do you guys are there other kind of avenues of building a collaboration?
I would have to check on that, but I would say yes. This is very much a service level type of approach. It was led by the Office of the Chief of Staff of the Space Force. But there may be other interested areas, that may not require an official, agreement between organizations. For example, I just mentioned the hypersonic threat is an interesting dilemma for us. And so, at any given point, if any of your students are interested in understanding that problem set and try to find solutions on how can a sensor on Earth or a combination of sensors on Earth and orbit better track a hypersonic missile, I'll take that. I'm sure we can find it. And if it shows promise, I'm sure this is something that can be elevated as well. For the more formal approach, yes, it is a service oriented type of program, but I could do the research, and this is something that the university is interested in. We can at least do the connections.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Last call. Any other questions for Colonel Cruz? Okay. Well, let's thank our speaker for the talk and for his service, and we'll do everyone's muted, so it's me clapping, but I'm sure everyone else appreciates it. And just so everyone knows, there's another group of us not here, but that will be actually visiting Buckley and getting to see some of service members working on these issues and problems this Friday. So there's been a group of 10 students that from CU Denver College of Engineering that will be making that trip on Friday. And if that goes well, maybe there'll be opportunities in the future. Maybe we can make it a once a semester thing. So that's that way you get to actually see the base and some of the hardware that Colonel Cruz was talking about.
Yeah,
So,
very much looking forward to that for sure.
okay, well, thank you again, and I'll see you on Friday then.
All right, thanks very much, Dr. Galkowski. Thanks very much to the team and the students. Good luck on your studies. And then again, if questions come up, if a research topic comes up and you would like some ideas or maybe some help getting some data and research, just reach out, and we'll be more than happy to assist. So thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. You'll take care.